By the time the third HOA board member slid into the brown water, clutching her white pool towel like a surrender flag, I had to admit the view was beautiful. Where there used to be a sparkling resort-style aquatic amenity, the Cedar Vale Reserve Community Pool was now a churning, chocolate-colored crater. The palm planters were half buried. The no diving sign was barely visible above the slurry. The HOA's expensive blue deck chairs looked like shipwrecks. Someone yelled that the filters were going to cost 30 grand. I leaned on the brand-new, HOA-approved decorative fence that replaced the one they had ripped out on my property. I took a sip of iced tea and said, more to myself than anyone else, that I guessed the drainage really was an issue, Rhonda. Across the mud bath that used to be her pride and joy, HOA President Rhonda Pennington turned, streaked with soil, eyeliner smeared, and spotted me. The look on her face said she had finally put it together. The soil delivery. The planter placement. The email thread where she had written that we did not need a drainage study because this was simple landscaping. I lifted my phone, the HOA's own approval email glowing on the screen, and smiled. 3 months earlier, all I wanted was a fence and some peace. I had bought my modest corner lot home in Cedar Vale Reserve to get away from city noise. I worked from home, kept to myself, and found joy in grilling exactly one steak on Friday nights and ignoring all human contact until Monday. My lot backed up to the community walking path, and the walking path backed up to the world's nosiest people. Dogs on extendable leashes wandering into my yard. Kids cutting through to take a shortcut. Random joggers using my flower bed as a stretching station. So I did the reasonable thing. I replaced the rotting waist-high fence with a new, slightly taller one. Same footprint. Same general style. Just newer. Functional. Private. That was my mistake. Because Cedar Vale came with an HOA, and the HOA came with Rhonda Pennington. Rhonda had that specific suburban energy. Chunky statement necklace, highlight-streaked hair, yoga pants that had never seen a gym, and a personality somewhere between wedding planner and dictator in pastel. She introduced herself the first week in the cheeriest possible threat. She told me she ran the HOA and welcomed me to the community, then added that they took aesthetics very seriously here. I nodded, said it was nice to meet her, and went back to my barbecue. 2 days after my new fence went up, there was a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. Unapproved structure. Remove immediately. Fence exceeds height guidelines and is not on file as an approved improvement. Signed Cedar Vale Reserve HOA. I checked the handbook. Section 7.2 said fences may be up to 6 feet tall with board approval. Section 7.3 said replacement of existing, previously approved fences in like kind is automatic approval. My fence was 4 inches taller. 4 inches. I emailed the board. Politely. Attached photos. Measurements. The original developer paperwork. Rhonda replied that the feel of my fence was wrong for the community. It interrupted the open concept visual flow. She told me to please remove it within 14 days or the HOA would take corrective action at my expense. I stared at the phrase open concept visual flow for a full minute. Then I opened a Notes app file and titled it HOA Nonsense, Evidence Log. The fence became the issue. Rhonda started treating it like a personal affront. At 6 a.m., she would power walk past my house, stop, and take photos like a crime scene tech. She sent friendly reminders about community compliance to the entire mailing list, with phrases like rogue fencing and visual walls of hostility. At the next board meeting, she actually said, into a microphone, that if we let one man build a prison wall, the next thing you know, everyone's in a compound. I submitted an official architectural request even though I technically did not need to. I attached survey markers, photos, and a copy of Section 7. The board reviewed my request for 3 weeks, then voted to deny it on the grounds that my fence was too fortress-like for a family-friendly brand. Meanwhile, violation notices escalated. $50 fine for failure to correct unauthorized structure. $100 fine for continued non-compliance. $150 fine plus threat of remedies including removal and billing. I appealed. Calmly. Attached more documentation. Pointed out that half the homes on the inner loop had fences taller than mine, built by the original developer. Rhonda replied with her favorite phrase. Those are grandfathered. Your fence is not. I talked to neighbors. Most were too scared to cross Rhonda. A few whispered that she had made them repaint their door because the shade of blue was too aggressive. The last straw came when I received a certified letter that ended with a threat. If I failed to remove the fence within 7 days, the HOA would exercise its right to correct the violation and assess all costs, plus administrative fees, to my account. I texted a photo of the letter to my older cousin Dean, who just happened to be a land surveyor who had seen too many HOA power trips. Dean called me immediately. He said they could not just stroll in and demo my fence, not legally. I glanced at the carbon copy line on the letter. The HOA's lawyer was copied. I told Dean that apparently someone had told them they could. Dean sighed and told me to keep everything in writing. He said if they were dumb enough to actually touch my fence, we were going to have a very interesting conversation about property damage. On a Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of wood screaming. I rushed outside to find 3 guys in neon vests and an HOA board member I had only seen once, all standing in my backyard like they owned the place. The fence panels closest to the walking path were already down in a neat stack on the grass. I asked what they were doing. The board member, Glenn something, held up a clipboard and said they were correcting a violation. Per Section 11, the association may remove non-compliant structures. I told him this was my property and they could not just do this. Glenn said they had given me notice and I had been warned about fines. The president approved this personally. I did something HOA tyrants never expect. I stepped back, took out my phone, and said clearly that I did not consent to this work on my property, while filming their faces. The contractor looked instantly nervous. Glenn did not. He barked at me to turn that off and said I was in violation of something. I smiled and told him that was cool, and to say that again for the record. Glenn did not. They finished anyway. By lunchtime, the old fence was gone, the posts cut at ground level, the yard now fully exposed to dog walkers and random kids. A bill showed up in my inbox that evening. Removal of unapproved structure, $2,700 plus $300 administrative fee. Dean came over the next day with a tape measure and a copy of the plat map. We walked the property line. And that is when we realized the HOA had made a very special mistake. Half the fence posts they had cut were not just on my side. They were directly on the recorded property line, marking the legal boundary between my lot and the HOA-owned common area. They had not just ripped out my fence. They had ripped out a boundary marker and altered common property without proper board vote, not to mention trespassing and damaging my improvements without a court order. Dean's grin was slow and evil. He told me not to fix this. Do not put up a new fence. Do not touch anything. Just document. He said he had seen HO as implode for less. I followed instructions. I documented. I photographed. I sent a nicely worded email to the board asking them to provide documentation of the vote authorizing this, as well as their legal basis for entry. Rhonda replied with an all-caps subject line saying I was continuing to defy community authority. And then, in her haste to sound important, she did something beautiful. She wrote that she personally ordered the fence removal after I refused to cooperate. Dean read it and whistled. He said she just signed the damage herself, and called it neat. With my yard now a fishbowl, I did what any spiteful but law-abiding introvert would do. I turned to petty compliance. First, I read the covenants. All of them. Twice. I found a magical line in Section 5. HOA amenities and beautification projects may be initiated by any member via written proposal. The association is responsible for maintenance of all approved projects. Interesting. Next, I reviewed the community map. The biggest, most expensive amenity in Cedar Vale was the clubhouse pool, directly downhill from the common strip behind my house. Finally, I opened a new email thread with the subject line, Proposal for Community Pollinator Garden and Natural Berm. I attached a friendly PDF with mock-ups that Dean helped with, showing a raised pollinator garden directly behind my property line on HOA land. Decorative boulders. A nice, tall landscaped berm to visually soften the walking path and restore open concept flow now that my fortress fence was gone. The key phrase I used repeatedly was that this natural berm would restore the gentle visual line Rhonda had championed in past meetings. I included a note saying that due to the pool's proximity downhill, I recommended a drainage assessment, But if that was too costly, we could proceed with careful soil placement and trust existing grading. Rhonda's reply arrived 45 minutes later. She loved it. This was the kind of community-minded project they encouraged. A natural berm was a much softer aesthetic than a hard fence. No need for special studies because they had never had drainage issues, and this was simply landscaping. Approved. I asked in writing for the HOA to contract the work. She insisted in writing that the association would gladly cover costs because it improved the brand. Dean leaned over my shoulder as I scrolled and asked if I had warned her about drainage. I said yup. He asked if she waived it. I said yup. He asked where the pool was. I said 40 yards downhill. We did not high-five. That would have felt too obvious. The berm went in 2 weeks later. A landscaper, hired and paid by the HOA, dumped several truckloads of rich, dark soil along the back edge of my lot, beautifully sculpted into a gentle, curving hill that looked great in the photos Rhonda posted to the community Facebook page. "New pollinator garden coming soon," she captioned it. So much better than a big, ugly fence. I asked again, in a reply all, just confirming the HOA was responsible for any runoff issues from this new common area structure. Rhonda responded with a digital eye roll. Obviously. 3 days later, the forecast called for unseasonably heavy rain. Dean looked at the radar, then at the freshly mounded, unpacked soil. He said that proper drainage channels and silt fences would really help right now. I sipped my coffee and told him he should tell the HOA. Dean did. He emailed the board and the property manager, carbon copying me. No one replied. The storm rolled in that night. When the rain hit, it did not sprinkle. It attacked. Sheets of water pounded Cedar Vale, turning roofs into waterfalls and gutters into rivers. The community group chat lit up with people asking if anyone else was losing Wi-Fi, saying their patios were flooding, asking when the sky got so loud. Behind my house, the brand-new berm did exactly what overstuffed, unpacked soil on a slope always does in a downpour. First, it sagged. Then it slid. Slowly at first, just a little slump toward the walking path. Then the top layer liquefied into something between melted chocolate and quicksand. The walking path vanished under a brown tide. It hit the gentle slope beyond, picked up speed, and flowed straight toward the community pool complex like a very focused landslide. I stood at my back window and watched, phone recording, as the entire back half of the berm joined forces with Mother Nature. The mud wave reached the pool deck, hit the pretty pavers, and lapped right over them like it had been waiting. By the time the rain eased up, Cedar Vale's showpiece pool looked like something from a post-apocalyptic water park. The shallow end was completely brown. The deep end was a murky soup. The pristine white pool steps were buried in sludge up to the 3rd step. The skimmers were clogged solid with mulch, leaves, and the remains of Rhonda's beloved decorative grasses. The next morning, I walked down to the pool with everyone else. Rhonda was there, in a plastic poncho, horror-struck, staring at the devastation. The property manager hovered nearby with a maintenance guy who just kept saying this is so bad. Residents whispered, asking if that was mud, if the pool was over, if a truck had exploded. Rhonda rounded on me the second she saw me. She demanded to know what I had done, saying this was right behind my house and I must have caused it somehow. I raised my eyebrows and said, pretty calmly, that I was pretty sure she did this per her approval of the berm design. I had warned her about drainage. Twice. In writing. I held up my phone and pulled up her email. No need for special studies because we have never had drainage issues, and this is simply landscaping. Approved. Her face went a dangerous shade of red. She hissed that this was sabotage and I had set them up. I told her I made a garden. She turned it into a dam. The board might have handled it quietly. But then the pool contractor came out, took one look at the mess, and dropped the number in front of everyone. To drain, clean, flush all lines, probably replace the filtration system and resurfacing, they were looking at 50 to 60 grand. Dead silence. Then someone asked if insurance was going to cover it. The contractor shrugged and said it depended. If it was an act of God, maybe. If it was preventable human stupidity, he nodded toward the soggy slope, they would have some questions. The questions came from the insurance adjuster, a city inspector curious about why half a hill had been dumped without erosion control, and a growing crowd of residents wondering why their summer oasis was now a seasonal bog. I did not have to push. I just answered questions truthfully and forwarded emails. When the board called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse, it was packed. People stood along the walls and near the snack counter, arms crossed, eyes on Rhonda. The property manager put a projected image on the screen. Before, brochure photos of the sparkling blue pool, pristine deck, bright umbrellas. After, a shot from that morning of the same pool looking like a giant mocha latte. Then the adjuster cleared his throat. He said their preliminary review showed that this damage resulted directly from improperly engineered landscaping performed on a slope above the pool. They had copies of internal emails in which a drainage study was explicitly dismissed. He clicked. Up came Rhonda's no need for special studies email, projected 10 feet tall. Therefore, he continued, this claim was likely to be denied. The association would be responsible for all costs. The room erupted. People yelled that she did this, that it was because of my fence, asking if they were getting special assessments now, saying they could not afford $6,000 because she hated privacy. Rhonda flailed and insisted this was not her fault. She only approved a garden. She trusted members to act in good faith. The adjuster shook his head and said no ma'am. The member recommended an assessment. She overrode it. Twice. She approved the project, hired the contractor, and waived basic safety measures. That was on the association, and potentially on its leadership. Someone from the back shouted, asking if they could vote to remove her now or what. They did. Right there, same meeting, by secret ballot just to make it official. Rhonda Pennington was removed as president, removed from the board, and barred from any committee related to property decisions for the foreseeable future. The board, now led by a very tired but determined treasurer named Marta, huddled with the HOA's lawyer. A letter went out a week later saying that due to findings of negligence, the HOA would be pursuing action against former President Pennington to recover a portion of the damages resulting from unauthorized decisions and failure to follow expert recommendations. Their lawyer also quietly advised that they might want to settle that fence issue. They did. I received another letter, this one strangely polite. Dear Mr. Hart, upon review, your original fence was consistent with community standards and should not have been removed. The association would fully fund replacement, including any required permits, and would credit my account for previously assessed fines. They apologized for any inconvenience. Signed Cedar Vale Reserve HOA Board. Rhonda stood frozen at the back of the meeting room, her face pale, her hands trembling as the vote results were announced. Removed. Barred. Liable. The words hung in the air like a sentence. Someone muttered that it served her right. Another person actually clapped. She grabbed her designer purse, the one with the gold chain, and walked out without a word, her heels clicking on the tile floor with each humiliated step, knowing that the $60,000 mistake had her name all over it.